Welcome to Chasing the Narrative, my show where I talk about what I want to talk about because it's my show and not your show. We have Adam Abramowicz here today, which I'm very excited about for probably a completely different reason than you guys are excited about. You guys might be thinking, great, Adam's here from the Army Painter. And others of you are thinking, great, Adam's here from the Best General. And if you're really old, right, you're thinking, wow, Adam's here from Chasing the Narrative. But Adam is really here, so I can tell what I call the crotch story involving my wife and Adam.
Yeah.
That's the actual reason that Adam's here. But we're going to save that story for a little later. We're going to kick it off and we're going to say, good morning, Adam. Thank you for taking time while the baby is sleeping.
Yeah, she actually is right now. I have her home with me today. She's getting to that point now where like she'll wake up 35 minutes after you put her down for a nap and she'll fuss about and then she'll put herself back to sleep, which is awesome because the first 4 or 5 months were terrible with her. The
It,
oldest slept like a baby, like a baby. She slept swimmingly. She was great. This one, it took a little bit of time.
how old's the youngest?
She turned a year about 3 weeks ago.
Okay. What's interesting about that is when I was planning Charity Hammer last summer for August, there was like six big name people from 40K that couldn't come because they had either brand new babies or a pregnant wife who was going to be delivering like during Charity Hammer.
August is such a hard time of year because you have Nova, you have WTC, you have ETC, WTC, that all, and I think Gen Con's like
Yeah.
just before that. But I
That's why we're in June now. We
okay.
moved.
Well, I don't know. Like I'm kind of how do you say like I'm not relevant anymore to the 40K world like I used to be. But I would still love to come to
Oh,
Charity Hammer. It's
we would love to have you.
yeah,
I think you're relevant. You're relevant to me, and that's
no.
and that's really all that matters. If you want to come to Charity Hammer, to be perfectly honest, there's not some difficult interview process. It's really just does Colin think you'll make good content? It's really not any more
I could do
complicated than
that.
that.
That's yeah.
You sure can.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a couple questions about Adam the person. So where did you grow up?
I grew up. I was born in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, in Lower
Okay,
Bucks County, so just north of Philadelphia. I grew
which
up in a town
explains
called.
The Eagles fandom.
I was there until I was 14.
Oh, really explains the Eagles fandom then.
Well, if you knew my family. If I had a brief period where I wanted to be a Joe Montana 49ers fan, and I think I was basically like black sheep of the family. I didn't know. I didn't. He's young. He's trying to figure it out,
Your dad's like, you could feed yourself.
pretty much. Um, but that explains the Eagles fandom. I moved to Ohio right before my freshman year of high school, and I was there throughout high school and college. And from that point on, I left Ohio. My folks still live there. My sisters both live there now. So Ohio, I don't consider Ohio my true home. Not that I have anything against it, but I'm a Philly boy. I mean, that's through and through.
Where in Ohio? What NFL team are your parents closest to in Ohio?
NFL team are they closest to? So they're south of Cleveland,
Okay.
but they are, believe it or not, my parents live 15 minutes from the NFL Hall of Fame. Yeah,
Oh, okay. I just think that it's funny that people move around and their football allegiances sometimes change, but what it seems like is it depends on whether that team was good when they moved there. And in the case of Cleveland, the answer is definitely no.
so Cleveland fans are very interesting because when I moved there, they didn't have a team anymore,
Right.
right? Um, and they didn't really have anybody to root for. They would watch games to hate on the Ravens and hate on the Steelers because the Browns became the Ravens. And then when they got the team, they were terrible, obviously. And the Browns historically have always been terrible. They've had a couple decent seasons, but they're still some of the most diehard fans in the world. Doesn't matter how
Yeah.
bad they are. It's football is life there. It's Ohio State. I mean, the running joke in Ohio is that you put your starters from the Browns up against the starters from Ohio State, and the Buckeyes are going to win.
Yeah.
And you could talk to Brad Chester about that. He would probably 100% agree.
I actually always think that that's funny because, like, the idea of that sounds funny, and then if it actually happened, the college kids would get wrecked. It's
Yeah, they
like
would. I mean, because you're talking, you look at like
the
offensive line.
worst player in the NFL is better than 98% of college football.
Yes,
So,
it's
all right,
very true.
that's great. So, as a child, as a
Mhm.
young person, what were you super passionate about that isn't 40K?
Basketball.
Okay.
Basketball and hockey were things that I was into. That was every night after school, after homework, out in the street playing hockey with my next door neighbor, playing basketball. I was terrible at baseball. I come from somewhat of a baseball family. My dad was real good. My uncle, my cousins were pretty good. But I would say it was that I was artistic as a kid, so a lot of drawing. Um, I had a TV in
What
my
sorts
room.
of things did you draw?
Everything.
Was it just like was it like real stuff or comic book stuff or dragons or just all the things?
Yeah, so I went to a Catholic school and there was like this just to put it into perspective. I don't even remember how you pronounce it, but it's the Michelangelo sculpture of Mary holding Jesus, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
The
I don't
Pietà,
know what it's
I
called
think
either.
it's called. And I did basically a drawing of that when I was in the fourth grade, and I won this award with the Catholic Church, and it gave me like I think a $50 college scholarship or something.
And now you automatically go to heaven probably.
Yeah, something like that. Bought my
Has
ticket.
to be the case.
Yeah, I can be
Um,
a normal person for the rest of my life now. But
I like hearing that though. Let's pause on that for just
yeah,
a second. I like hearing about you drawing as a kid because I was just reading a book from a actually when I say just reading, it's before COVID. So like 15 years ago, I was reading a book, Adam.
okay,
And it was a jazz pianist talking about how parents are always asking him, and he's like super accomplished, like really famous jazz pianist. And he said, he says, people ask me, how do I get my kid to be a professional musician? And he says, no, they make that decision because they're so obsessed with the thing that they want to do that you have to ground them away from it. He's
yeah,
like, no one had to make me practice the piano. When I got in trouble, they took away my ability to practice the piano.
yeah,
And I think as a dad of three kids, and you're a dad of two daughters, I've got three sons, that hits me so hard because you can watch them do stuff and they're not going to be a superstar at the things they don't want to do. Right.
yeah. I mean, I hear that a lot for like hyper intelligent kids. Like my wife is very smart. Her brother is very intelligent. He's an executive chef now. He's like really talented chef in New Orleans, but he could have gone to law school. He could have been he could still be a politician. He's just very, very intelligent. But he was so into reading as a kid that when he was punished, that's what really got to him. They said, "No books today, Ben." Which is kind of a shame because you want your kid to read, you want
Right.
to
Yeah.
digest information and become more intelligent, but he was almost too smart for his own good, I guess. But yeah, no, it's a crazy thing, and I've Zoe, my oldest, is getting to the point where she's showing her creativity and her creative side, and she goes to dance class. I don't know that that's going to be her passion. I don't know that art will be her. I don't know what her passion is going to be. But it'll be really interesting to see if she develops something like that. For me, it's always been creating.
Hmm.
Whether it's my videos, my movies, writing, illustrating books, doing what I do at the Army Painter. It's always been about creating, and
Hmm.
I think that you and I grew up in a time when our parents and the people that were guiding us really wanted us to become bankers, become, you know, they wanted us to get these white collar jobs and go to college and make $80,000 a year as soon as we graduated, which wasn't the case for me necessarily. Wasn't the case for a lot of people, but I think that there's a lot of people, and I think I'm very fortunate going back to drawing in a Catholic school. My teachers thought that there was something wrong with me. Right? They really did. They made me take an IQ test in the 4th grade and then again, I think in the 6th grade.
They thought you were autistic or something, or
Well, autism wasn't really a word, and ADHD
sure.
and ADD wasn't, I'm
We didn't understand it. Right. Yeah.
they didn't understand it. I'm 30. I got my first ADD diagnosis a year ago at 37,
I
36.
got mine a year ago at 41.
Right.
We're twins.
Yes. Well, I was very fortunate that I had this one teacher who stayed with us. We were such a bad class that she decided to go with us from like 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade. Miss Browse. Love her. We hated her at the very beginning. Loved her towards the end. Because we were so bad, she wanted to make sure that she handled us as far as she could.
Right.
She recognized after one of these assessments, like Adam's not, you know, it's not that he's stupid, it's that he's uninterested.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not going to, he's uninterested in the math. He's uninterested in these things. So she started to work in things where if I got my work done, in a timely manner, and I didn't interrupt class because I was a daydreamer, I still am. She would allot time for me in the day to draw, and that's where that the drawing I did of the Pieta came from. And it was a couple months of working on that when I got my schoolwork done. And my parents, my dad, God bless his heart, blue collar guy, high school athlete. I wanted to take art classes. So they signed me up for art classes. And, I think I'm very fortunate in that.
Yeah, I think how old are your parents, Adam?
My dad will be 60. Well, he turned 63 this year.
Okay.
Mom will turn 61 in October.
So I have an interesting dichotomy here because my parents are in their 80s.
Hmm.
So my parents are literally born in and before World War II.
Right.
And so one of the interesting things I think is that my parents don't understand anything I do to spend my time that isn't work.
Right.
Because when my parents were my age and had me as a kid, they only worked and adulted.
Right.
They didn't have hobbies. They just worked at the jobs that they had chosen 20 years earlier, and they just cleaned and cooked and took care of kids. And now we're all from a generation where we had tons of free time as a kid, right? We had all this different video games and all these different stimuluses, and now we're all grown-ups and we're all continuing to do our hobbies while
We
also
still
parenting.
need still need simulation. It's
Yeah, and
simulation,
and
right?
I find you talked about drawing and creating. I have found that if I'm not doing something that involves presenting, I'm
Yeah.
not happy, which is why Best in Faction happened and all this other stuff. So,
Right.
yeah, it's wild how much that has changed. Like my parents' childhood is unrecognizable from mine.
I mean, I would say the same thing to some degree.
Yeah,
I mean, it
sure.
was, granted, your parents are quite a bit older. They're
Well,
almost
just one generation earlier. That's not
at
that big
least,
of a deal.
right? But I think like, you know, those days, and
Yeah.
they,
The good old days that we both know weren't actually good.
I had this conversation with my buddy Alvin yesterday, and uh, he works for the town that we just built our house in, and he's helping me with landscaping. Great guy, black guy, and somehow the concept of the good old days and when things were great. He's like, when was it? It was never great for me.
Yeah, it was
When was
really
it my
great if you
time,
were a
Rob?
heterosexual white man. It was
Right.
really wonderful.
It was great. It
Okay.
was great for us. Right.
Yeah,
Anyways, not to go into that, but like,
yeah.
you know, I just think of my dad, and he comes from a big family. He had three older sisters that were basically out of the house.
Okay.
His father worked in the steel mills after World War II, and had to retire very early. I think when he was, yeah, very early. But I just like I have these visions of my dad and his two brothers playing baseball in like sepia tone. My
Right.
grandfather watching with a cigar, and his big
Yeah.
glasses.
And a hat.
Well, yeah, and a hat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pleated pants, tucked in
Yeah.
shirt. And then when he got home, he'd take off the shirt and he'd have his wife beater tucked in. That's what granddad did. That's what he looked. It was a very different time. It was a very different time.
You
Granddad,
know?
his hobby was making a whiskey Bloody Mary and sitting back in the recliner and watching the Phillies. That was his
Yeah.
hobby.
That was his hobby.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So, that's all great. So when you this kid, Adam, who
Mhm.
is into sports,
Mhm.
into bike eventually into bicycle racing,
Yeah, I did that one.
which you've talked about a ton. I don't know that we're actually gonna spend any time on bicycle racing. You've talked about it a lot on other shows.
Yeah.
But so you're into sports and you're into art.
Yeah,
What does kid Adam think he's going to do when he grows up? You remember?
I do. So I thought when I was a kid, there were a couple things. It changed when I got to high school. Um, I thought that I was going to be a comic book illustrator
Okay.
or an animator for Disney. I did.
Right.
And to some degree, I've achieved that. Not for Disney. I mean, I did submit. There was a process to submit to become part of their, like, I can't remember what it was called, the engineers, the
Imagineers?
Imagineers. Like there was
Mhm.
an application for young kids to go and do like a summer away. And I passed the assessment, but I was too young. I was too young by like 8 years. Um, but I've illustrated a comic book for a friend. I've illustrated a couple uh, novels for some friends. And so I've been able to do that. And I wanted to be an architect. I didn't go to school for architecture, but I did design our new house. So I've been able to kind of check those things off. I'm very fortunate in that regard.
I actually think there's something there that's worth unpacking. I think there's a book called that you actually may know because he's from your part of the world, but there's a book about a guy named Randy Pausch called The Last Lecture. He was a
hmm,
professor at Carnegie Mellon, and he got a diagnosis that he was going to die in like 6 months. And he had two little kids, and he prepared this lecture about his life that he filmed for his kids. There's a book about it.
I think I've heard about this.
It is an amazing book. But
Yeah.
one of the things that he talks about is all of the dreams you had when you were a child, write them down and figure out at least loosely how to do them.
Yeah.
Because you're right. As a kid, you wanted to be an illustrator for a comic book, so you illustrated a comic book,
Right.
right? You didn't say as a kid that you needed to spend 40 years doing that and then get a pension and retire,
Right.
right? Kid,
Right.
you just wanted to do it. And I think
I
that's
just wanted to do it. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up.
right. And
Right.
then you wanted to be an architect when you were in high school. Is that how that works?
I mean, I had some ideas of that. I also wanted to be a golf course designer, and I wanted to make movies. And when I got to high school, um, I was very fortunate. I was at this high school of 400 students in Ohio. And it was like in years recently before us moving there, kids used to drive tractors to school in the morning because they worked on the farms.
Sure. Yeah.
That's how rural it was, and it was transitioning into a small suburb. But they had a radio station and a TV station, and I got involved with the radio station. I think my sophomore year, and basically, we were DJs, and
Hmm.
this is why I love Steve Joel so much because he's a
Well, and
DJ.
he's amazing.
He is amazing. Um, I tell him that every chance I get.
New Zealand's gift to 40K.
Pretty much, pretty
Yeah.
much. Um, so then that opened my eyes to certain things because I wouldn't say that I was necessarily shy or outgoing in my youth, but that kind of opened me up and taught me, like, I had a lot of self-confidence because I could all of a sudden talk on, oop, just bang my knee into my desk. Sorry, guys.
Good audio.
Yeah. But it gave me a good bit of confidence. And then when I kind of, I get out of that high school because I wasn't being the artsy athlete in a school where athletes weren't and jocks weren't necessarily the cool kids. The cool kids were the kids that did drugs and ditched school. That was the cool kids in my school. So it didn't, me being king of the winter ball and having a varsity letter didn't matter to anybody at my school. But being this weird artsy AV kid jock didn't really fit in high school. Like, I wasn't a popular kid, didn't necessarily know how to talk to people, but somehow when I got to college, it all made sense. And going back to like the assessments that I had in school, like I remember one of the people, these people told my parents, like, your son's probably going to struggle, and when he gets to college, he's really going to flourish. And when I got to college, I got straight A's. But it's
Were
kind
you
of
bored? Do you think you were bored in high school?
hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I got to art class and when I got to my radio class and like, I loved it. When I was sitting in, social studies with my basketball coach who didn't give a crap about teaching. He was just there to coach. That was really boring.
Yeah.
I love history. I love reading about it today,
Yeah.
but not the stuff that we taught, in high school.
Well, an interesting thing here is that I also have had lifelong ADHD that was just figured out what it was.
Yeah.
And looking back at school, I actually think that I was just bored for the whole time.
Yeah, same here. I
Because
mean,
now I like learning, like I like knowing the knowledge. We just did a chasing the narrative where somebody explained quantum mechanics to me, and I loved it. But
yeah.
like, if you were not interesting especially to teenage Colin, I was not paying attention to you.
So I want to know if you had the same experience because
Okay.
I think I was misdiagnosed with anxiety,
Yes.
and depression, right? Depression
Mhm.
is that's still
I
there.
have the same three diagnoses, just so we're
Right.
on the same page.
Well, I ended up having this weird falling out with the professional I was working with, and then I found another one, and they said, "Look, I think you've been misdiagnosed all along. I think you have ADHD."
Mhm.
I was like, "Well, I'm interested to hear why and how and more." And then I start reading more about it, and for me, and I'm wondering if you had the same experience, it almost made the rest of my life make sense.
Uh-huh. I'll one
Like
up you,
people
Adam. I'll one up you. My 12-year-old, sorry, my 13-year-old, they age and it's weird. I have a 13-year-old and he has ADHD. And I
Mhm.
go to his parent teacher conferences and they give me PTSD. Like I remember the same conversation with my parents.
Yeah.
I just remember it very clearly. For me, what I've realized as I've gotten older is how strong the hyperfixation problem is.
Yeah.
At any one time, there's a thing that I'm interested in doing. Right? There is at any one time, there's a thing that I'm interested in doing. One
Yeah.
thing at any time. And it used to be that okay, for the next 4 years, I'm going to play World of Warcraft nonstop. Now for 2 years, I'm going to compete at Magic the Gathering. But whatever it was the thing that I was just so focused and so obsessed with that it filled every waking moment of my mind. And I thought that was just the way Colin was, and it was a struggle to get myself to do the other things that have to get done. Like getting haircuts is impossible. Like how am I ever going to remember to schedule a haircut? I'm busy doing this other thing. And now that I understand that and I look back at my life and I look at what that is, everything makes so much more sense. That's what it is. That's what the ADHD is for
And I think that there's this the hyperfixation thing is definitely a problem,
me.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
it's definitely a problem. I think I've learned to manage it a
I
little.
should be doing my actual job right now, just so we're clear. Instead, I'm
Well,
interviewing you because
this
this
is
is the
kind of
thing
my
I'd rather
actual
be
job.
doing.
See, that's why I'm lucky, because I've found a field of work that basically works with my hyperfixation,
Yeah.
right? So, and that
We need you
the
to
other
paint a lot, Adam. Yes.
yes, but the other side of it though is not getting burnt out, because if you it eventually happens, right? It happens with
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering. It happens with whatever you're doing, World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Eventually you get burnt out. But if you start taking it, if this podcast gig, this network that you're doing becomes, your full time, you
Yeah.
might get burnt out on it. But if you
Could
really
be.
love it, you have to preserve it somehow. How do you
Yeah.
do that? You find other fixations.
Mhm.
You find hobbies to distract you from your hobbies that are that
Yeah.
are important. I don't know. And
It's really hard, honestly, because like as I've gotten older, especially with COVID, and for those that don't know, COVID has is like it was a giant catalyst for mental health.
yeah,
Everybody who had mental health problems is probably doing worse now than they were 2 years ago. At least 80%. Um, I went back to therapy. I went back on drugs. Like it's really hard when I'm at home now all the time, and I think you are too. And
yeah.
it's very hard to do all the things that need to get done, even if they're easy, when I'm home because I'm home and I don't want to do those things.
So I've been working from home, 10 years before COVID happened.
Okay,
So, like, it's kinda like that scene in Batman where Bane is like, "You merely
I was
adopted
born
son,
in this.
I was born in this." Yeah, right?
Exactly.
Um,
No one
so
cared who I was till I picked up the brush.
What a pretty voice. The, uh, the thing for me, and I think it's been, the thing about the diagnosis, I wanna kinda go back to that, is
Okay.
is it's made me realize why people don't quite understand the way that you operate, right? My
Uh-huh.
wife, she doesn't get it, and trying to explain it to her feels somewhat selfish, because it's like, hey, it's like I didn't mean to be this way. It's just how my brain works,
Right.
But she is starting to understand that, like, I work from home. I'm in a house all the time. I need to get out sometimes. I need
Mhm.
4 hours to myself. And also at the same time, being this kind of weird extrovert, neurodivergent weirdo, when I go out to Mardi Gras, for example, and we're at the parade and you're talking and you're on and you're doing the thing because this is what
Right.
we do.
Right.
We turn on. You don't get to say when you turn it off, but when you turn it off, you are off.
Mhm.
You are done. You are locked into your phone or a book or staring at a plant outside the window, not understanding what's happening around you, because your sensories, sensory system is all overloaded and you are just quieting down. It's like powering down the engine. You've just downloaded a whole bunch of information. Your computer is burning up. You can hear
Right.
it fuming, but it just needs to stop now. And
I
that's
can't go to sleep for like 4 hours after I get home. It doesn't matter what I was out doing, it doesn't matter how late at night it is. If I was out doing anything social, it takes me an incredible amount of time for my system to be like, "Okay, great. We
let's
can
go.
relax now." It takes forever.
Do you sleep poorly?
Not anymore, actually.
Sleep
I
like shit.
did for a long time. But I have sleep apnea, and the machine made a big difference for me.
I'm sure.
Well,
So
it's not just the machine. I think people don't understand. So when you have kids, and I know you get this because we schedule this around nap time.
yeah,
Structure is incredibly important for children, and people don't know that. If you don't have good structure for your children, they will be tiny monsters. Like they have to go to bed at the same time. They want to eat at the same time. They want structure. They want to know what the rules are. They want to know what toys they can play with when they want structure
you
and they
played
behave
it.
better if you give it to them.
Yep.
And I think that actually maintains and we don't realize it. I think that grown-ups also want structure and we don't give it to ourselves. So I have a certain amount of nighttime ritual things that I just do every night.
Yep.
And I go to bed even on the weekends at the same time. I go to bed at 11 every day. And sometimes I have insomnia till midnight, but I don't have insomnia until 4 a.m. anymore. That's the big thing because
I
I
think
have this
I'm gonna
pattern where my body just knows it's time to go to sleep. Also, pot helps sleep a lot.
well, see,
I'll just throw that in there. I live in
I
a legal state, so I'm not doing anything wrong.
I wish. I think that would help me so much, so
It
much.
is
And I'm
it
not
is an amazing product. Well, I'll do an episode on marijuana another time, but it is an amazing thing.
I'll just say this, and I'm not gonna throw anybody under the bus, but when we had Hurricane Ida or whatever it was, um, I was with some people that are very close to me at the time. My wife was out of town, and it was my first real hurricane, and they had just gotten back from Colorado. They may or may not have brought something edible with them, and I was freaking out. I have a very young baby with me. My wife is gone. I've got my other kid with me. My dog. We've literally left everything at our house, and we're just like we've girded the loins. We're ready to go,
And it's terrifying.
and it's terrifying. The winds are
Yeah.
crazy, and this person very kindly said, "This might help you," and great. And there was clarity. There was I could see how for me, being kind of we talk about that sensory thing, that lack of
Mhm,
endorphins that we have and serotonins, and you're constantly craving caffeine, you're craving certain things. We are
mhm.
predisposed to be addictive to things, but that is something that just calms me the F down. And I think would be very helpful for me in a lot of ways.
And
So
is it illegal in Louisiana? Is that the deal?
it's yes and no.
Okay.
You can go
Medical
to
only?
St. Charles and St. Charles Avenue at Mardi Gras and be right next to 40 cops and light up a blunt, and they're not going to do anything to you necessarily. But procuring gummies and things of that nature here, because I would not want to smoke pot, not me personally. There's history of cancer, and my
Yeah,
mom's
sure,
suffering from lung cancer at the moment, and uh, you know that I
sure,
don't.
sure.
But no, I have no access to get gummies. We were able to get my wife's grandmother the drops that you put under her tongue when she was in the later stages of her life in hospice because
Mhm.
she was so bad. But it took an act of God to get that for her.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about how a jock artistic kid from Pennsylvania ends up working for Army Painter, but we don't have time for that. So you're gonna have to come on again to tell that story.
I could tell that story in 3 minutes, but yeah, sure.
Well, I want to, but we only have a little bit of time left with part
Okay.
one, and then for those that are wondering, part two. Adam's a big golfer, and as I thought about this interview, I realized that golf is the sport that I least appreciate of every sport I can think of. So I'm going to make Adam justify golf. We're going to ask some
Yeah,
hard questions about golf. That's
very
going to be part two. But for to finish up part one, I think we should talk. I think we should talk a little bit about the importance of being open about mental health because I think it helps people. The Especially for those I'm born in '79. It sounds like Adam's born in the '80s.
good.
Especially for our generation, there was no talking about mental health. There was no crying. There was no, like, that was just not okay. As everybody's getting older and society's changing, both Adam and I have talked openly. In fact, the story I wanted to tell, oh, we haven't told the crotch story. We'll finish on the crotch story.
Okay.
Okay. So we promised the crotch story. We have to tell the crotch story.
The people came here for the crotch.
That's exactly. They came here to talk about your crotch, and we
We're
haven't
sitting
done
here
it yet.
talking about feelings and shit, but they just want the crotch.
Right. So one of the reasons that Best in Faction was successful is that we pivoted years ago to being incredibly vulnerable and open about mental health. That was one of the things that we did. I went to LVO and people came up to me and they hugged me and they were crying, talking about the mental health coverage we did. Now, I'm not a mental health professional, and the only reason we started talking about it as openly as we did is because I was struggling wicked bad with winning at 40K. I was a mess. I was winning a lot, and I wasn't actually happy. I was trying to be happy, but there was this awful high anxiety BS situation. Adam
Appreciate you
came on the
trying.
show to talk about anxiety. And instead of us talking about anxiety, Adam interviewed me about anxiety. I didn't ask you to, Adam. You just took over the conversation and asked me questions and listened to the answers very attentively and then shared your feelings. That episode is, I think, to this day, like the third most downloaded episode of Best in Faction,
Really?
over like 103 episodes.
Wow.
I haven't looked recently, but it used to be one of the top 5 for sure. And that was a pivot point for us as a show. So you have been very open about depression and suicide and mental health, and I just wanted to give you a chance for the hundreds to thousands of people that are going to watch this to say your piece about that.
Look, it's something that's it's stigmatized, right? And I think being, like you said, the artistic nerd jock, there's kind of this strange dichotomy there, right? Because I have feelings, but I also want to compete and win and be macho,
Mhm.
and
Winning is really great. That's what my brain tells me.
you know what, winning is great, but you know what's that's a story for another
It
conversation,
is.
another
It
day.
is.
But it's been overly stigmatized, and we as men are told that we have to suck it up and we have to shut up and tough it out. And that works if you're hit by a pitch at the baseball mound and you got to go take your base, right? As long as you don't have a
Mhm.
broken arm or something like that, just it's gonna bruise. Go ahead, spit on it, rub, and take your base. Good job, way to go, soldier. But mental health is a different kind of thing, and it really can. Are we allowed to swear on this show?
Sure. Well, yeah, go for it.
I mean, I work for a Danish company. Swearing is not a big deal. As we get older as men, I think that we get in these weird spots because we hold on a lot to our hobbies and to the things that we like, but we get so involved in sports or what other these pursuits are, and then when you grow up, you just kind of have a job and you have a family, and
Mhm.
these delusions of the past, these delusions of grandeur. It's like Uncle Rico from the movie Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah, I'm pulling divine. Yeah.
And could have won states. I could throw a football over that mountain. And I think that that's like a very real thing for a lot of guys, and they struggle with that.
Mhm.
It's like this glory that they once had or saw in themselves. And when you kind of just become an overweight, pudgy man with gray hair and limited abilities, you kind of, I don't know. That's one of the many reasons I think that men suffer from mental health, and it could be any number of reasons. I'm overgeneralizing, or maybe I'm hypergeneralizing here. I'm rambling, but mental health is something that we need to take very seriously, just like you would an ankle injury
Yeah.
or your eyesight. I mean, I've lost too many people and people close to me because they weren't willing to get help beyond talking to a friend. And talking to a friend is a great thing to do, but you or I, Colin, like you said, are not mental health professionals.
No.
Um, we can't diagnose, we can't prescribe, we don't know all of the right things to say. We think that we do because, I think that at the end of the day, you and I are kind of empaths. And I think most neurodivergent people are pretty empathetic.
Yeah.
But it's important. And I want I hope that when I'm able to talk about this openly, I can get across the point that, look, you're not weird because you are sad, or because you're having a hard time with life, or
Mhm.
because you're overly anxious about what's happening around the how could you not be anxious about what's happening around the world? We're literally
Right?
in the middle of a global pandemic. World War III is popping off potentially.
Right?
You
The
know,
democratic system is collapsing. Yeah, no, it's bad.
Rome is falling,
Yes.
right? So, like, how could we not
Right?
have anxieties and be sad about the things that are happening around the world? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to oversimplify depression as sadness, because it's not just that. But if you feel alone, if you feel like something's not right, you should talk to somebody. If your ankle is bothering you when you walk to your car, or you're having trouble running because you've got a bad hip,
Right.
would you not go see a doctor? If you can't see the street sign when you're driving, would you not go get your eyes checked?
Some people wouldn't, but I think your point is valid. I wanna share that the thing I've discovered over the last few years. I've done the same job. I've sold software for 20 years, and I'm tired of it.
Nerd.
Um,
Sorry.
what's that?
I said nerd.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sorry.
But I've
Right.
done it for 20 years, and you know what? I'm really good at it. And especially at my last job, I got to a point where there wasn't anything to learn. And I found myself struggling to do even the 3 hours of work I would need to do in a particular day because I just didn't want to. My brain wanted to do other stuff. And this got harder and harder and harder where I'm building these to-do lists of personal to-dos and work to-dos every day over the past 2 years for COVID. And I'm adding 15 things to the list every day and I'm doing 5 of them. I
Yeah.
have time to do all 15, but I just am not. And I have this kind of negative self-talk that this is literally just my fault. You have no self-control, you have no willpower, you're a piece of shit.
You're a piece of shit.
You would rather play video games than accomplish this very easy list of things to do. You needed to call the eye doctor because your glasses are scratched, and you couldn't be fucking bothered to do that because you wanted to play Dying Light 2 with your friend on the internet. That's an actual thing. My glasses are scratched. Um, so it's on my to-do list. It's been there for like 2 months. So I
Don't call
thought
your
that
doctor.
that was just me being worthless. And I went back to therapy and I went back to medical professionals and I discovered that no, it's actually that I'm really smart, that my brain is really powerful, and
Yeah.
that I don't know how to handle it with the appropriate tools. And they're teaching me the tools to rein in that craziness. And they have me on drugs to help me rein in that craziness. And you know what? At this exact moment, I'm happier than I've been in a lot of years. A
I
lot of years.
I think that people need to stop looking at nerd, and this is a term that I learned in my own description
Neurodivergent.
of ADHD and depression and anxiety and all
Yeah.
these things. Neurodivergence shouldn't be thought of and seen as a flaw, because when wielded properly, there's this guy that I follow and listen to all the time. Neurodivergent people are fucking superheroes. We really can be when wielded correctly. Like these hyperfixations, the ability to multitask. When you can harness that and you learn how to harness that, like, you're literally superheroes. We could do more work, we could be more productive, but at the same time, we need that break, right? We need to shut it down, like we were talking about. You gotta power off the engines for a little bit. But when you can get everything operating, when all the hydraulics are greased and everything's working
Yep.
smoothly, we are efficient freaking machines. And that's something that I am actively trying to work on harnessing even more, especially as my role at the company is changing, and that's a total discussion for another day. But
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Okay. Let's quickly tell the crotch story, then we'll do the 10-minute part 2 on golf. So, I was gonna I'll tell the beginning of the crotch story. So, you guys know Adam from all these different places, but when I heard him on Best General, my wife had just started painting, and I reached out to Adam to ask him if he would teach my wife to paint. Now, it is important to note that my wife, who is also neurodivergent, is the sort of neurodivergent where talking to a stranger on the internet about painting is terrifying.
Yeah, she was very anxious early on.
So there was a lot of work put in, and she wasn't sure how this was before web meetings were a common thing. She wasn't sure how the camera was going to work and how they were going to talk and what device she was going to use. And there was all this anxiety. And I came home and Stephanie said, that was an experience. So, Adam, what were you wearing while teaching my wife?
Normal shorts that I always
No,
wear.
bicycle shorts.
Normal, no. I mean, like, you can't even, like these, like,
Those are tight shorts, Adam.
well, they're 7-inch inseam shorts. I have long legs, first and foremost, okay? I'm very proud of my legs, by the way. I worked
Okay,
very hard for the legs that I used to have.
I'm glad to hear that.
I have so I didn't know what I was doing either. Up until that point, I had had 2 people pay me to teach them how to paint, and they literally flew to my home
Oh wow,
to do that.
I was
And
not. You're way too good looking. I was not going to fly my wife to you.
oh, shut up. Um, I didn't have the technology, I didn't have the streaming stuff here, and I had crappy internet where I was living at the time. So all I had was my cell phone, so I kinda rigged it up so that she could see, but I have really poor painting posture,
Okay.
really bad painting posture. My painting posture when I have a mini is my leg up like this and leaned over.
Uh huh.
And I've had to improve it because now when I'm shooting tutorials for the army painter, this is what I do, right?
Yeah.
I have to have my hands on the desk. I have to have the camera be able to see. I've had to work really hard at improving that, but this is how I paint. And I had the camera rigged up like that, and it was just plain old crotch shot. And she says to me, she goes,
Framed
um,
perfectly, like his crotch filling the entire screen with the model above it.
I,
And she describes it as as super tight bicycle shorts. That's her version of the story.
I was wearing shorts just like these. But
Okay.
I I have to say that because I don't wear like that's one of the parts, my secrets to success of working from home is that you have to get up every morning and shower like you're going somewhere. So I don't just sit around the house in pajamas or whatever. I
Right.
always I wear this. I bought more army painter shirts to work even when nobody sees me, just so I feel like I'm in an
Yeah.
office. Anyways, I don't get embarrassed easily at all. Like you can
No,
say
not at
whatever you
all.
want. I was brought up on stage at the House of Blues gospel brunch in New Orleans with giant black women singing gospel beautifully and told to sing. And I did it. And I'm a
Okay.
terrible singer, right? I don't get embarrassed. I was filled with dread. I felt so awful because A, like
She was uncomfortable already.
in my mind, I'm like, exactly. I know Stephanie doesn't like this to begin with. Number one, because she's having a conversation with a stranger. Number two, like, I don't want to be a creep wad. Like, I wasn't trying to do that, right? Like,
It
I
was so funny.
still to this day, I feel awful. And the first time I met Stephanie in person, I remember giving her a hug and apologizing for the crotch shot.
So okay. She has no hard feelings about this. It is only funny. But I've not actually told this story to anyone. So it's fun to get to tell it on the show because I didn't tell that story to everybody.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Stephanie.
Adam, this has been fantastic. We're going to have you back. You're going to talk about more stuff. But for right now, we're going to be done with part one. If you guys want to see part two, you're going to have to join our members only area of our YouTube. It's the best in tabletop after dark where Adam's going to talk about golf. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that next. But for now, thank you everybody for joining Chase the Narrative. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining the show. And we'll talk to you guys soon.